Hi, I'm Jen Bateman, creator, writer of Behind the Eight Ball and president of the Minnesota Comic Book Association. You can find me at jcbateman.com. That's B8 is in the number 8, mn.com and MNCBA.org. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by a very talented creator and writer. They haven't been on the show in a few years, and it's good to have them back because we're talking about Behind the Eight Ball. We're talking about the MNCBA show, which is going to be in fall and in October. I'll let them tell you all about this. Here we're joined by the ever-talented Jen Bateman. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me back.
That's good to have you back here. You know, for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
I am an all-around creative, so I draw, I write, I copy, edit, I market, I make websites, I do it all. I have been creating autobiographical webcomics since the early 2000s. My current project, Behind the Eight Ball, launched about a year ago. And I'm also the president and creative director of the Minnesota Comic Book Association, a small press focused comic show, big little old style comic book convention here in the Twin Cities.
It has been a few years since we've last spoke. I'm glad you're doing well. I've always loved your creative work when it comes to either your illustrations or your writing here. Actually, let's dive into your creative process. If you were forced to reduce your comic making process to only 2 hours a day, what would you prioritize and what would you cut out?
My comics take about 20 hours to make. So there's literally no way I could do that. Even the rough drafts take longer than that. And I would say some of them that get really detailed can take upwards of 30 to 40 hours for the whole thing. So my creative process is pretty simple, however. I script the comics. The comics that I'm working on have a lead time of 2 to 3 years from when they were written. So it's such a gap of time that I can really effectively act as my own editor. Because I'm like, wow, I wrote this. And then I do a rough draft on paper, just cheap graph paper with red and blue pencils and Sharpie markers or pens. And then I scan it and the finishing process is all digital. So it's pretty basic process.
Do you enjoy that type of long format when it comes to your creative process? Does it give you a good headspace going into the creation of your comics, or is it just a process you've fallen into that's just worked for you?
Part of it was unintentional because I wanted to just do a chunk of the scripts and then do a chunk of the drafts and then finish the work. That has taken longer than I expected to, which is the mantra of creatives everywhere, right? Wow, I underestimated that one. I have so much going on in my life that I can only devote to making comics a certain amount of time. And also I have really severe ADHD, which means that I can only sit still and work on this a certain amount of time, which when your work process is very slow is difficult.
Right.
But it's benefited me to have a long creative process because in particular with Behind the Eight Ball, this is a project that has an end. It's probably going to take me 10 to 15 years to complete, but it has an end. The end is going to be at some point to be determined around the present time currently. So I would sit down and make a rough outline of the events that I wanted to draw about in a certain period of time. And then I would come back and add some more detail to those notes. And then I would further grab the chunks of detailed notes and refine those. And so giving myself the time to do this very slowly means that with each revision, I am distilling the narrative down to what's important to say and communicate what I want to say. There's not a lot of fluff. I know it can be wordy, but it's very dense and it covers a lot of ground very quickly. And I think if I hadn't given myself the space to let the subject breathe and give myself time to digest it, and also get to the point where it was no longer emotionally affecting me
Right.
to the level that I could write about it. The work has really benefited from having such a lengthy creative process.
I know it's an autobiographical comic here. I know you're really putting, quite literally, yourself into the comic. There has to be some creative burnout with such a heavy autobiographical material. Like, how are you dealing with that?
I get asked that question a lot in various forms, and the answer is, for me, it's just not heavy anymore.
Mm.
Being able to write about it and draw about it is really the last step in me emotionally processing these things.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was still affecting me deeply, I wouldn't be able to make this work in the form that it is. So you have something emotionally affecting you, you go through a period of time where you try to understand what happened, you investigate other sources. In a lot of cases, I reached out to people from my past that I hadn't talked to in 10 or 20 years. I tried to gather impartial information where I could. I tried to gather documentation and things that weren't really subject to opinion or interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
things, hard facts. And I tried to put this together so that for me, by the time it was down on paper, it's saying I'm done with this myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the paper now. It's locked away. It's done. This is the final conclusion. And now I hope this process that I've gone through can connect with other people and they can find ways to apply the things that I've learned to their own lives to work through similar things they may be dealing with.
Is it safe to say that this comic, Behind the Eight Ball, is this therapy for you? Is this a closure in your chapter of that part of your life?
It would be the final step. So you would call what I practice, I suppose the best term is radical acceptance.
Mm.
These things happened. I have accepted they happened. This is my story. This is where I'm coming from. It is important to understand where I've come from to put current me in context and to understand why I am the way I am or why I do the things I do. But it would be the last step, which is acceptance, right? I can't do anything about this. The story is written, it's there, it's in digital ink, but ink, and so this is the final step. This is closure, though I'm not fond of the term closure because it's
Right.
sort of an illusion, but
Because you have such a long process, if you had to hire a productivity coach for your art, but it could only be a fictional character or historical figure, who would it be and why?
oh my God, I have, I don't read fiction. I don't know. Sherlock Holmes.
There you go.
I feel like we would probably get along very well.
What would it be about Sherlock Holmes that would you both would be comrades in artistic endeavors?
I think we're both truth seekers. We're both people who have a love for problem solving, solving the puzzle, figuring it out. And I think the fictional character of Sherlock Holmes has a similar trait to me, where when it's necessary, you're able to set aside your emotional investment in a topic and purely look at the data. And sometimes you would say spurg as a slur, but sometimes in a very robotic or autistic way, that you're able to separate out the chain of events and do the detective work to determine what happened, even when it involves you, or most people would have more cognitive bias because of the emotional chargedness of the subject matter.
Okay. As I was curious about that, I've kind of been using that question more recently to figure out the creative process and mindset of people on the show. So that was a good answer. I like that one. Fictitious, obviously, here. If you're stranding on a desert island and you could only have one non-digital tool to make comics, what would it be and how would you MacGyver the rest?
Tool, does that include the substrate? So am I given like paper, or do I just have to pick between like a writing tool and paper?
You either have a choice of the writing tool or the paper. You
Oh
don't have,
God.
yeah.
So I suppose I would have my pad of graph paper that somehow didn't get waterlogged as I found myself adrift in the ocean on this island, and I would have to wait till lightning strikes a coconut tree and then fashion a piece of charred coconut tree bark into a makeshift
Hmm.
pencil, and these would not be archival materials, so people buying my artwork would be very unhappy.
Because you work in both the physical and the digital space here when it comes to your creative process, is there a tool or an app from the digital side of things that you've stopped using that has improved your workflow?
Stopped or started?
Sorry, started using, my mistake.
I recently, with this comic, switched to, I use a Microsoft Surface Pro 9. I don't use Apple stuff, and Clip Studio Paint. And I use that, I scan the physical drafts of the comic, and then the inking is done in Clip Studio Paint. And then when the line work is done, I move it into Photoshop on my large computer where I add the halftone patterns and paper texture to make it, the comic is meant to resemble clippings from a newspaper of comics that are pasted in one of those black square memory books, if you've ever seen one of those. And then, of course, the white narrative is my current day self narrating the story. But I would say that the Surface Pro and Clip Studio Paint is really what has made this possible for me. What I struggled with in the past when I worked with primarily traditional media, is because I am so persnickety about inking. I would spend 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 7 hours inking a comic and just make some action that I found intolerable, and I would physically destroy the comic and start over because Jen does not use correction fluid. And so it became paralyzing. I couldn't produce anything because depending on my stress levels, I would not like how something was lettered or not like how dark a certain area got when I was hatching it. And so I would tear my work up and start over, and nothing ever got finished. And for people following my work, they don't see this private struggle I'm having to finish literally anything. All they see is crickets, on my website or social media accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very obvious to me from the start that if I'm going to do this ambitious project that I have outlined through the first 2 books and fully scripted the first volume, which is 300-ish comics, I believe, that are mostly or fully scripted.
Wow.
That I would need to use a digital process, because even though I'm still very slow and persnickety, if I encounter one of these critical errors of I just can't live with this, at least then I can erase the ink and just rework that one area that I really can't consistently produce without a tool that enables me to work around my diagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah. But that's got to be tough as well too, because you put so much time into not only the planning of the book but also the creation of the book. How many volumes are we looking at? How many books are we looking at for Behind the Eight Ball?
Ideally, I am planning for 3 printed collections. So it's a trilogy. They all have titles. The first title is Memento Mori. So it's got the caterpillar on the cover.
Nice.
And I expect it to be roughly around 1,000 pages when it's finished. Each volume should clock in between 3 and 350 pages. I plan for the printed versions to actually have sort of pseudo scrapbook pages in them. So I'm going to take a few pictures of me when I actually was a child. I have some report cards and art I did when I was young. And so there will be scrapbook pages with actual artifacts from that time period kind of interspersed
Okay.
throughout the comics in the print version.
So like a mixed media collection, basically.
Yeah, my spouse is big into decoupage
Oh yeah.
and gluing things to other things
Yeah.
and has gotten me into that, which I find very relaxing. It's
Nice.
very low pressure, something you can just do to chill out for a while when you need to.
I love that. That's awesome. If you had to teach a 10-year-old how to make comics in 20 minutes, what would be the one exercise you would start with?
I'd say just basic drawing skills. You can use stick figures, dialogue balloons. I'm not a I'm not a teacher. Comics are a pretty basic medium. I almost feel like you don't really have to teach people
Mm.
how to make them. If you ever heard, there's a oh gosh, it's Russia or Eastern Europe. There's thousands of years old. This schoolboy's primitive comics that he drew on paper made of birch bark. And I think even cave drawings, I think comics is just a medium that comes very naturally to anyone who feels the need to express themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely something when if you come from a logical background and you're dropped into the creative sphere, it can sometimes be a daunting task. I can fully attest to that. 100%. Going back to university for fine art was an interesting experience because I mean I learned a lot about myself, but I learned a lot about the talent that was out there throughout the centuries, and it was amazing about color theory, about hidden masters that weren't part of the big four of the Renaissance, etc. And it's just amazing what art brings to life.
I'm a big advocate of people expressing themselves and engaging in creative activities.
Which kind of segues into the MNCBA. Let's talk about that here because I think that's interesting. I've never been to any Midwest shows, so I don't know anything about this particular show. And you being the president, I think you're the perfect person to ask. What is MNCBA and how did you get involved with this?
So the organization started and it went through a lot of changes and iterations over its lifespan. The actual organization as a contiguous entity has existed in some form for over 30 years. It originally was a group of comic book guys who decided to start a convention here in the Twin Cities in the late 80s. They ran it through the early 90s. It grew pretty quickly. There weren't a lot of serious comic book conventions in town at that time. Of course, for those who might not know, Twin Cities is a combination of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I am located in St. Paul. Um, and a guy named Dominic Postleone, he referred to as Mick Post, ran the show for a number of years. He was connected to the Minnesota State Fair. His family ran the 1919 root beer booth at the fair, and he brought the convention to the fairgrounds,
Wow.
where it grew to a considerable size and then sort of plateaued. He passed away unexpectedly in later 2014, shortly before I started my midlife crisis
Mm.
and set off on my own chain of events. In May of 2015, I came up here for the spring show and was considering moving from Texas to the Twin Cities to Minnesota,
Mm.
and really identified this show as something unique on the current convention circuit. For shows that have a similar feel, you might say it's somewhere between Heroes, which is very focused on comics and
Mm.
comic
Yeah.
creators, and something like Small Press Expo
Okay.
that's focused on indie books and smaller creators. The Twin Cities has a very strong comic book scene. We have World Monster headquarters here, Xander Cannon's Xander Cannon. Xander's gonna kill me. Xander Cannon, Elliot Rahal, John Bivens. It's a huge group. We have MCAD, lots of really talented students coming out of MCAD, the comics program there. And so I identified the show as something very unique It's very non-commercial. They don't bring in celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't focus on some of the very big, expensive, flashy stuff that larger shows do. There's not a media presence like you see with the Reed Pop shows
Right.
or San Diego Comic Con. And there was a group of 3 volunteers mainly leading the show after Nick passed away. I kind of in the background had started volunteering because I was identifying areas where the organization could be modernized, where it could be advertised better. I was very interested in giving it more of a presence on the national stage so that we would be able to bring in a more variety of guests and be able to expand what we were offering our local attendees.
Mm-hmm.
And for reasons not really worth discussing, I was just not given the opportunity to really do any of those things. And the show sort of lost its footing following Nick's death. He was one of those larger than life personalities, and he really was the glue that was holding it together. And he was also funding a lot of the organization's operations. So his absence caused a lot of difficulty. And then COVID was really the last straw for that. They had obviously had to cancel shows in response to COVID, and there's still expenses you have to pay year round, even when the show is not happening. Your web hosting costs, your storage unit, your email software, just all of those things. And it just didn't really make it through COVID and everything else. And then the fellow that had been running it most recently said, maybe it's time to pull the plug on this, and he shut it down. And I was sort of taking a break from everything at the time all of that was happening. And my friend Steve Henniger is another longtime volunteer, almost from the beginning. And he said, no, I don't want this to end. And so he decided to restart it. And I've said this before, but I was like, now's my chance. I'm going to do this now or it's never going to happen. And so I came back on board and had to convince everyone to allow me to make a logo and do the branding and all that. And it ultimately resulted in, not really planned, but ultimately resulted in kind of a passing of the torch from the older generation that had been running the show previously and newer generation of creators, which, you know, I'm 45, I'm old enough, but I'm still younger and relatively fresh blood. And we do still have some of the longtime volunteers who have been on board, and some people were just, you know, I'm ready to step away, or it's yours now, Jen, whatever. But it eventually became clear to me that to accomplish the things that I want to do, I needed to have the ability to steer the ship and help guide people in the right direction. And to Steve's credit, I think he was able to recognize that it was time to let someone else kind of guide things and start to set direction and tone. And my main goal is bringing the organization together to have its own identity, which obviously from the struggles after Nick passed away, it didn't have that. And so for this to be something that survives me when I can't do it anymore, it has to have procedures that are in place, written down. I want to make an employee handbook basically for the volunteers. Everything I do is thoroughly documented. I do a lot, but it's all documented. There's spreadsheets. We recently moved all our volunteers to a Slack chat. We have an app system for managing scheduling for the meetings and shifts for volunteering. And so it was just sort of a process of attrition where I got involved and gradually became more involved until, you know, I'm the one that is both able and willing to do the work it takes right now to keep this thing going. and hopefully find the right people over time to step into different roles so that eventually it can belong to everyone that is involved.
Is there something you're looking for in an executive or in another person in the organization to kind of step up? Like this could be like a job posting technically on this interview if you wanted.
There's areas where I definitely could use help. I am not able to devote a lot of time to things such as monitoring what's going on in depth in the comic industry. So we launched a newsletter, and I'm still looking for local contributors to the newsletter who are willing to write, little soundbite topics on what's going on. People who would be able to help me with content for our social media. I am looking for someone with the time and ability to help us scan old show flyers and program books and transcribe written articles or using automated scanners,
Yeah.
edit them, and some of those kind of things where I just physically don't have the time
Right.
to do all these tasks. I would love to have a Throwback Thursday where we share photos and memories from past conventions every week, but I don't have the manpower to do that yet. So there's a lot on the wish list of things I would either like to do that I've sort of started but can't pursue,
Mhm.
or things that I would like to implement once we have the volunteers and someone that's serious and committed to actually getting that work done.
It almost sounds like you could utilize the students around, the various universities or whatever in journalism or digital media or anything like that to get co-op placements or something like that to assist. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity for those that love comics or their field.
It would, and we've had a couple of new volunteers come on board recently
Nice.
who are students and have expressed interest in doing that. So it's a slow process of onboarding people.
Yeah.
I don't. This is me wearing my manager hat
Sure.
because I'm a manager at my day job too. So this is something that I deal with a lot. But people often come to you and say, "I'm really excited. I want to do the thing." And it turns out that even though they want to do the thing, they're not actually very good at doing the thing, or they don't understand how much work is involved in doing the thing.
Yeah.
And so they either bite off more than they can chew or overcommit. And then they're frustrated, and I'm frustrated, and everybody's frustrated. And that's no good. So, what I like to do is bring in new volunteers, have them work as a volunteer at the show, which is by far the easiest job. We have a position called floor minder, where literally all you have to do is walk around and mind the floor and make sure everything's okay and talk to people and just be visible in case someone needs something. And so if we have people volunteer at the show and they come to the meetings, as they're able to build a relationship with me and I can feel out where their strengths are, I can look at what they're interested in doing and their strengths and find something for them to do that they're actually going to enjoy doing and be successful at, so that they're happy, I'm happy, and everybody's happy instead of frustrated.
Fair enough. That sounds like a good thing to do, especially like hiring qualified people. I'm curious here because I haven't been to MNCBA here. What's a hidden gem of that event or Minnesota's comic scene for that matter that people should know about?
There are a lot of really talented artists here producing some really interesting and funny and unique material. One of the things that I have done as I have kind of taken over some of the application process is make sure that any local comic creator, and by that I mean someone who is actively making web comics, mini comics, print comics, some kind of comics, I am prioritizing comic book creators in the show. And then space we have left over, we let in illustrators, artists, writers, and other creatives that are sort of adjacent to that industry.
Mhm.
But you will really find at this show a lot of interesting material and good stuff that you may not hear about otherwise not come into the show. So platforming the independent creators and the students and this really great material that just doesn't get the exposure it should or hasn't been discovered yet, that's definitely the gem. You will find a lot of gems on the floor at the show.
If you had to give a TED talk on how to survive and thrive at comic conventions, what would your top 3 bullet points be?
Drink your water. Don't let yourself get dehydrated. I'm guilty of that one. Have a list in advance if there's something you're looking for, because you can get easily distracted. Boy, howdy, you're looking for a back issue, and then your buddy finds you and starts talking to you, and you go home and you're like, wow, I didn't even look for the thing I went to buy. Know what you want and be open to new things. Check out the panel programming. If something looks interesting, go check it out. You don't have to restrict yourself to only the things you know. A perennial complaint of artists at comic book conventions is everybody comes in and looks at the guy with the print wall, right? And they buy pictures of Harley Quinn and Spider-Man. And they just pass over all these tables with indie creators selling their own stuff. And I would say be open to looking at new things, be open to talking to some of these creators who are very hungry to have people read their work and get noticed. Because if you don't do that, you're really missing out on some stuff that you may enjoy.
But that's always interesting because we're always limited on the amount of time we have when it comes to comic conventions, whether we're, perusing the aisles of Artist Alley or we want to go to a Q&A session or whatever the amazing panels that you have there are. What do we choose? How do we choose? It's like you go in with a plan and then you just throw out the plan because it's like, oh, there's just so much great stuff to do.
I will tell you one more thing. I think our show is the perfect size. We have shows twice a year. We have a 1-day show in the spring and a 2-day show in the fall.
Okay.
The fall show is the one where we typically bring in guest artists and it's bigger, but we're not San Diego Comic-Con. We never will be. It doesn't take more than a day, or in the case of the 2-day show, the 2 days for sure, to see everything that you want to see. Our shows are not so large that it's overwhelming. As someone with sensory issues, I pay attention to the noise levels, to things that would overwhelm people. We try to keep space between the tables so people can get around. We mind the size of the aisles. So we're very aware of that sort of overload you can get at a convention. And over time, I have no plans or desire to move the shows to bigger venues, only to curate them better so that we're packing the best show we can into the space we have, but it's still something that feels accessible and affordable to the people that are coming to the show, that they are able to come to the show and see everything they want to see without having to compromise and miss things that they might otherwise want to participate in. We also put our panels on our YouTube channel. Oh. So, if you come to the show and you get distracted and miss a panel, they are available on our YouTube channel within usually a couple months after the show. So we make those available as sort of a historical documentation.
That's really good. Yeah, I'm sure there's many panels that have great information that is tailored, I should say, to those that want to learn about them. What are some panels that you have going on that you can talk about for the upcoming FallCon that you have here?
We're still nailing down our panel programming for the fall show. Our local MCAD professor, Paul Fricke, will be doing sort of a drop-in comic class. He did one at SpringCon, and he'll be doing another one in the fall. I don't think he has determined exactly what that will be about. I usually try to have an artist do a comic book class. So I'm looking at who I might bring in to do a sort of make your own or draw along. Last year at FallCon, we had Jean Ha do one on Saturday, and then a Duluth artist named Jesse Switters did a drop-in comic class on Sunday. We advertised those in direct mailers to the geographic area around our show, and they don't cost anything extra to attend.
Nice.
At SpringCon, we had a master costumer named Bill Hedrick do a demo for makeup and costuming.
Oh, wow.
He's planning to come back for one of our panels for fall. And I'm actually trying to get our Sunday programming focused around cosplay because we just brought back a cosplay contest to the show. So we're looking at we're still planning it out, but we will have some of the same drop-in comic classes and interactive activities. I'm hoping to have a group that does zines. They do kind of drop-in zine classes at local libraries, and I'm hoping to talk to them soon about maybe coming to the show. So anything that's interactive and gets people to make stuff with their hands and actually engage is high at the top of my list.
Nice. That's awesome. Speaking of interacting, being that you're the president, being that you're talking about this amazing show itself here, what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned from interacting with fans at your events?
It's made me a better listener. I've focused a lot on trying to meet people where they're at and really hear them, to take the time to consider where people are coming from when they have issues or looking for help with something. Really trying to think about, if I was attending the show, what are the things that would make my experience better? I've mentioned it elsewhere, but I streamlined our admissions process and got us online ticketing so that getting in the doors is a lot easier, that we don't have people waiting in line for hours to get in and things like that. So I've really focused on hearing people's feedback. We do solicit feedback from both the attendees and the exhibitors, and we try to respond to that.
Is there anything I haven't touched on you'd like to talk about, that whether it's the convention, whether it's the comic, that I haven't asked you yet?
Can I talk about AI?
By all means, let's dive into that, because that's a cluster in itself.
Yeah, this is probably my biggest concern with the convention going forward, and it really affects every aspect of it. But last year we voted on a policy, and by we I mean all of the volunteers voted on a policy to prohibit the use of generative AI at our event.
Nice.
And I am already running into issues with exhibitors who have submitted ChatGPT written ad copy, which my pattern recognition rivals the LLMs. Like I sniff this stuff out very easily, like the images or the text. It's something's off here. This doesn't sound right. And it's very frustrating for me as someone who sees these events as a way for people to engage with their creativity and the creativity of others. And on a deeper level, their humanity, because for all people, whether you're actually an artist or not, creating is a core part of the human experience. And I'm very concerned for, in particular, where the use of generative AI is taking us in terms of dehumanizing this process that has been so essential for pretty much all of human history. The oldest cave paintings are 40 or 50,000 years old. And more disturbingly for me, the fact that some people are unable to respect that boundary where we said we don't want this at our show and are trying to circumvent that and get it in. And I would say, if I have one concern for the longevity of the show and how long this is going to be around, it's going to depend on how effectively we are able to maintain that boundary and keep it about work that is made by people for people and not regurgitated by a chat bot. Because for me personally, I'm putting in this work and doing this because I believe in this cause and because I passionately believe in the power of human creativity. And so if it comes to a point that we start allowing generative AI work into the show, that's you can have Gen or you can have Gen AI, but you can't have both, because that's just not something that I can morally abide. And it's getting very difficult already, and I'm not sure where it's going.
And like you said, it's out there. There's nothing much we can do about it, but policies and rules and everything that you have put in place to at least limit as much as you can to stop these from invading a convention. Because humans being humans, you're protecting your brand, you're protecting the convention itself, you're highlighting the human creativity, which I love, and I hope this goes on for many more years in the future for sure. But yeah, it's got to be a hard struggle.
Behind the Eight Ball is at its core about the process I went through. I call learning how to be a person. So I had a midlife crisis. I said, who am I? And what am I doing? Who is this person I'm married to? What do I want for the rest of my life? And I hit a reset button, and I it was a painful, difficult process, but I went through all of the steps I needed to go through to get to the point that I'm at now and to feel like a full, complete human being and comfortable in my own skin and authentic. And it deeply concerns me that when we use ChatGPT to rewrite something we have written or generate a message to someone else instead of writing it yourself from a place of authenticity, when you use ChatGPT or OpenAI or some other program to make an artificial headshot or a fake selfie or art of yourself that isn't real, you're engaging in a process that neurotypical people, for the most part, don't understand, but autistic people will be very familiar with. It's called masking. And what happened to me was I had a mental break because I had pretended to be something I wasn't for so long that I forgot or never knew who I really was. And now this technology is causing a lot of people to essentially engage in digital masking without understanding the consequences of what they're doing or considering the long-term ramifications. We've already seen studies showing that ChatGPT use negatively affects people's cognitive function. I have personally already witnessed people that can't distinguish AI images from real ones. So they're losing touch with reality itself. And as a society, I'm afraid we're heading down the road of some sort of reckoning, because if if you come to rely on these programs the way the tech companies want you to, you're essentially outsourcing your executive function and to a lesser extent your identity. If you're conversing with me via chat GPT online or email and I run into you in person and you can barely string a sentence together, what happens? Well, in most people, they're going to have an identity crisis because who am I? Am I Bob or am I the product of chat GPT? And we are having this stuff rolled out with very little thought to how these things are going to affect people psychologically. And my response is just to, one, make my work, which wasn't created with this in mind but feels very timely, and try to do whatever I have the power to do to help people reconnect or stay connected with their authentic experience as a human and not get sucked into they want to have one app that does everything for you. And it's like, great. What if you lose your phone? What if the power goes out? I ditched my smartwatch for a Casio. I have put app timers on my phone, and I am actively disengaging with this stuff because I can see now the dangers that it's posing, and I don't want that to happen to me. Something that is touched on in my book, and I will be brief, is that there is a kind of abusive relationship called coercive control, where an abuser who appears to be good or helpful on the surface gradually strips away a person's ability to think and reason for themselves, so that they become dependent on the abuser to feed them interpretations of reality, to help them make decisions. And for all intents and purposes, it looks to me like people are willingly walking into this kind of relationship with these artificial intelligence products that are allegedly helpful, but what they're really doing is stripping away people's autonomy and damaging their critical thinking skills and cognitive skills. And it's extremely alarming. Pick up a pencil, draw a comic. It doesn't matter if it's good, just do something for yourself. Do it for you with your own hands.
Touch grass, basically.
Yes. Touch grass, draw comics every day.
There you go. That's a great slogan. You should put that on a t-shirt.
Maybe I will.
There you go. Well, Jen, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me some time to talk about these things that are important.
Anytime. For those that want to support you, and of course, MNCBA, where can we find you? How can we support you? And anything else you would like to promote?
My website is jcbateman.com. It's B8MN.com. You can also just type jenbateman.com. And you can find information about the MNCBA, including applications, if you're a comic creator interested in coming to our show, at mncba.org.
Well, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and, of course, Jen's other interviews on our website, youtube.com/TGT Media, because my other website's broken. Just give me a break. I'm only one person. Please like and subscribe their past works as well, too. And you can find the podcast on twogeekstalking.podbean.com, or just search Two Geeks Talking, that's TWO, wherever you get your podcast. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.